Welcome back, everybody, for this week's episode of the JSS Podcast. I am Byron Enriquez, the casual executive and your local finance bro. We have the privilege today to have a great guest with us today, Jorge DeLeon with eXp Realty. Jorge has been in the business for over 30 years. And we'll get into his experience and a couple different accolades he has. But I just want to say thank you, Jorge, for joining us, and pleasure to have you.
Well, thank you for the invitation. It was nice to meet you at going outside of my comfort zone and getting to meet other agents in a different area of our county. And lo and behold, I got to meet you.
Yeah, no, same. I enjoyed the meeting, and before we kind of get into the questions, but this is the conversation, right? I think it's you've been in the business for 30 plus years. I've been doing this for 25, almost 30 years as well. And you know what everybody always says, you got to go to these networking things, and you've met my son Seth, and I'm trying to teach him that this is part of the business, and I can tell you I hate it. It's so hard for me.
Docked.
No, no.
Okay, but thank you for being honest.
No, not well. Look, I'm in me personally. My personality is I can be very introverted, but in this business, we can't, right? And so I've over the years have taught myself that get out of my comfort zone and talk and meet people and introduce myself. But I get very anxious, and it's hard for me to make that initial, hey, how are you? How are you? And what do you do?
That's fair. I mean, my shock was because you seem so natural and very comfortable, and that's why I was like, "Oh God, you don't say it,
Oh,
really, huh?"
yeah, it's interesting because I've done all those personality study things, and it everything leads to the fact that, like, if we go to a party, I prefer to be the guy in the corner just sitting there kind of holding up the wall. But if you get me started and you get into a conversation of a topic, then it's good luck, you know.
Yes. Ah, okay. Well, I didn't see that. I thought that for sure you were the life of the party. As my wife and friends can tell you, when it comes to real estate, I'm the life of the party. When it comes to social settings, I'm more like you. Although I'd love to have conversations and meet up with people. I can understand how the anxiety of going to an unfamiliar place and speaking with other people. I think that real estate agents, we can actually be very intimidating. Um, but I think it's just part of the persona that we have to put in to demonstrate our abilities, our confidence level, and I guess our knowledge base as well. So
Yeah,
it's part of the
because
whole.
it is part of it, right? And it's yes, we have to be out there and we have to be talking to people. And you weren't at today's morning's meeting, but they were talking about 50% of the business for realtors is obtained by personal relationships
Right.
and your sphere of influence. And aside from all the technology and the email and the websites and lead campaigns, like, still, according to the research, 50% of the business still comes from relationships, right? And so we have to, but I do get it. It's you go to a party and it's like, or there's all these social media memes and jokes that as soon as somebody says, hey, I'm listing my house, then you have you know
Yeah.
they pounce, and all the real estate agents are, oh, hey, so I just think that's always funny.
Yeah. Well, I can tell you a funny story about that. Is in social settings, many people did not know that I was in real estate because it was complicated for me to explain. Well, for me, it was complicated to explain that I was in real estate, but I managed agents. So, oh, so do you sell real estate? Are you, do you broker loans? What is it that you do? Um, and then instead of saying, yeah, I'm a real estate agent, I help people buy and sell homes. I would say that I was in the business of managing real estate agents that helped people buy and sell homes, and they were confused. So, so for many years, my our social media, our social circles didn't understand that I'm in real estate. And as a matter of fact, that to this day, I think that they struggle with that because they don't think that we are in active sales. Although my wife is getting a little bit more traction. She's
Yeah,
actually
but
kind of
but
known
but it's
as the realty lady.
yeah. See, it's funny you say that, because even in for me, the same, and even with my family, if you ask anybody, oh, what is it that Byron does, they're like, oh, he's in real estate. And I'm like, well,
Oh,
dad,
yeah.
especially maybe my dad, and I'm like, that I don't necessarily sell. I mean, I have my broker's license and I can sell houses, but that's not what we do. lender with finance and hard money. And he's like, I don't know what any of that means, so it's just funny.
Yeah, well,
So
whenever you want to, make a segment on how to speak to others about what you do for business, I think that's a good subject matter because I'll tell you all the mistakes that I've made. I'm sure that you made, plenty of mistakes too,
oh, yeah.
because the moment that you start hesitating as to what we do and explaining it, then people were like lose interest versus having that elevator speech. Hey, this is what I do. I help people buy and sell real estate through lending, for example,
Yeah.
or indirectly through, hard money financing, So people, I think that people are genuinely interested in knowing what we do for work, especially if we demonstrate a genuine interest in what they do for a living and what are the things that make them,
Well,
click.
I mean,
So,
yeah, of course, right? I mean, it's with anything, and it's I've taught sales for many, many, many years, and a different, and one of the biggest pet peeves I have is everybody goes to these sales seminars and they come back, oh yeah, do this, do that, do this, but then they forget they're going through a checklist and they're going through the items that we're taught to do, and they're not genuine, like you said, right? It's I have a genuine
right.
interest in, hey, this is what you're trying to do, and I can help you accomplish those goals, and let's see how that how we merge together to make that happen, as opposed to I got to get through these 10 questions, and why do you want to do this, and what, like, and I know, right? That's the process that a lot of people have been taught, and that we go through, but that leads me to one of the questions that I wanted to ask you, because I have my thoughts on this, but in your bio, you're saying that you've been doing this for 30 plus years, right? And I know we've kind of touched
Yes.
on it a little bit. What have you seen change in the evolution of agents, but the business, not just agents, but in the business, and just kind of that whole shift of how we do business, and things like that?
Yeah, well, there's been a lot of shift, and just as most method of clarification, or as a clarification, I've been licensed for over 30 years, um, but I was involved with real estate as my mom and dad's personal translator when they were buying and selling real estate. So I clearly remember riding in somebody's car, looking at homes when I was about 7 or 8 years old. I also remember when my mom and dad bought their first piece of, well, not even real estate. It was their first home. It was a mobile home right across the street from where I'm at here at in Wagon Wheel. There used to be a mobile home park called Wagon Wheel. Um, and I remember that process. It was a for sale by owner. They did, they got a pink slip when they bought it. I remember who they bought the property from down to this day. And I just remember the whole pain process. So, what has evolved in the last 30 years? We went from paper contracts that, kind of forced, well, not kind of, it forced us to actually do these conversations in person, from our listing presentation being in person, from writing an offer to presenting an offer. That's one of the biggest shifts that we've had. Uh, if somebody wanted to, write an offer, we'd meet, we would go through a form that was an ICR carbon form. We had to tell them to press
I
hard,
rem- I remember
and
those.
then take out the whatever color copy it was that they needed to keep, that was their copy, and then you would go to the schedule, the call with the listing agent and say, hey, I have an offer for your property. And when I'll tell you something, the first offer that I presented, I think I was like, no goodness, about 19 years old. Fred Evans was the listing agent on
Oh,
that
yeah.
property in El Rio. And I remember sitting at the kitchen table, and at that time, my mentor broker was there with me presenting the offer. And lo and behold, the offer was accepted. And we just had to wait in the car for the seller's answer. And which was so that's one of the major things that has changed. It's almost like if you ask a kid from that, that's only 20 years old, if they remember the Big Macs being served in a cellophane box, they have no idea what we're
Of course
talking
not.
about, right? So
No.
when we tell somebody that is, that is new, that we used to write offers on paper and present them in person, they would say, well, why didn't you fax or text it or email it? Well, because we didn't have that technology yet. So maybe we had a fax machine, but the fax machine was that paper that fades away, and you can't, you couldn't have it, you couldn't even use it back then.
Yeah, no, it's funny you say that, because I remember too. I just got my license, and this was, yeah, 25, 27 years ago ish. Um, and then going into like the MLS was a book,
Oh yeah.
that, right, that we would get a book, like another age term, like the yellow pages. It was, like this big binder that would come in. I forgot, it was every Monday or Tuesday or whatever, and that was the new week's listings, and you would go through it, right, and find what you thought your client would want, and make, either make a copy of it or something to share. But it wasn't, oh, online you go and you search the MLS. It was that. um
Well, yeah, an interesting thing about that book, it was Flex, the parent company of Flex, was the one that had the book. It was printed once a week. I think it was once or twice a week. You had to go to the association office to pick up a copy of your book. Um, when I did the buyer representation agreement training back in 2025, or 24 actually, and traveled the whole state for my brokerage to teach the buyer broker agreement, I actually picked up a copy of that. Kay Wilson let me borrow a book, and it was borrowed by somebody else. I think it was Don Carlton that still has a copy of that book. And Don Carlton is one of our local brokers here in Ventura. Um, but yeah, that book, that's where you found your comps. You had to go to the back and see what things closed for, and it was based on street. Literally, I'm not
yeah,
kidding you.
that's like the
And it
Thomas
only
guide.
went back. Yeah, that was you had to look at by street name, and then find out what sold in that neighborhood. So we didn't have as the information that we have available right now to be able to come up um, with a suggested list price.
Yeah, and I think and
So
I think and I think that's where the term pulling comps came from, because you would have to go to the binder and literally pull the comps out of the book
yes,
that you wanted to
yes.
use, right? And yeah, so yeah. Also to add, you mentioned, about be starting in real estate when you were 7 years old, translating, and if you've ever heard any part of my story, anything that I talk about, that's literally how I got started too. A little bit different. My parents owned a home. They weren't investors. They owned our home. This was, I think they bought their first home when I was maybe like 12 or 13. But my dad handed me the loan docs.
Oh,
And
okay.
he said, he was like, my parents speak Spanish, and it was, can you help me understand this, or translate, the loan docs for him, verbally, and just sitting there trying to read. This is a 12, 13-year old. I don't know what any of these terms mean. And I'm sitting there, making up. But ever since then, I noticed that it kind of came natural, right? And it made sense. Um, so, and that's where one of my passions, and I know we touched on it, kind of offline when you and I spoke. One of my passions in this business has always been, to help our community, right? To help the underserved. One of the things here at JSS, we have an investment fund, that we have set up to do our loans. And the goal for me with that fund was always to reach out to, not the country club folks, right? Our people, our people that know that, hey, they've been saving and they have some resources. They just don't know of the opportunities that are available to them to be able to invest like these, like the higher net worth individuals. So, and I know that's one of your passions as well, as being in the community and being able to serve our community. So, to share us a little bit about, how that has built who you are and how you manage a business.
Well, obviously, I believe that we're all a product of our environment and what we've been exposed to. As obviously my dad, being Latino, being born and raised in Mexico and coming here as a young man, and my mom, obviously, again, being Mexican, being a young person, their dream was, well, my mom's dream was to be a homeowner. My dad would not so much. His dream was to eventually go back to where he was born and move back. So he really wasn't that committed to laying roots here. My mom was. So kind of going back to what motivates me is they bought that mobile home, they sold that mobile home, they got into a contract to buy a um, a duplex. They were represented by an agent that was new. They bought a duplex. When my dad decided that, there were some changes in the political environment here, my dad said, if they close the borders, between the U.S. and Mexico, which I think that he took it literal, we're never going to be able to go back and visit. And I don't. And he wanted us to experience what it was, to be part of to be Mexican and where my dad was born and raised, and my mom as well. So they sold everything, and we moved to Mexico for a couple of years. The funny thing is that the agent, when they went back and said, "Hey, you helped us buy this this duplex, we would like to sell it." And the person did not tell my parents, "Hey, you have the alternative. Based on what your monthly payment is, I think it would be best for you to rent this property, hire a property management company, and then when you decide to come back, you'll have a place to live." That was never a consultation. It was, "Oh, you want
Yeah.
to sell? Sign here. You're going to sell it for this much." Sold it, packed our stuff, moved, came back for a few months, went back. We were homeless for a long time, and it took my dad. So that was in, oh goodness, it's hard to. I think it was 84, 85 when they sold. And I graduated from high school in 1992 from Buena High School. It took that long for them to buy a place.
Yeah, see, and
So
that to me, that's always been kind of a driving force in how I manage my business too, and how I, how I do business is because of that. I've heard so many stories like that. My grandparents were one of them on my dad's side. You know, they came over, also immigrated and slowly had bought a little house, and they bought another little apartment building out in like Apple Valley in Victorville, and they had a couple, they had built a little portfolio, and they had like two or three rental properties, but literally they didn't know, they didn't have anybody consulting, giving them information or knowledge. They had at the time where rates were maybe 6%, and that's when I got into the business. My dad was like, you should probably look at your grandma's, holdings. All their interest rates were at 12, 13%. And I was like, Grandma, why'd you do this? Well, they just told me to sign.
yeah.
Nobody translated, nobody, which, so that's always been kind of a thing to me, and how we those of us who are fortunate enough to be able to be professionals, and we can help our people, give them that good knowledge.
So and thank you for that question because it's a very interesting question, as to what motivates me to do what I do. And I think that if we were to put it down into, like, into a nutshell, it's the lack of um, access to information, and then also a lack of agents that have the necessary training to ask the right questions to ensure that the decision that these people are making is the right decision. So, for example, going back to the example, when mom and dad said, "We're going to go to Mexico, we're going to sell everything," the agent, from my perspective, should have asked more questions. "Hey, what do you plan on doing? How long are you going to be away? When do you plan on moving back? What are your plans to be able to do this? Did you know? Okay. Have you considered? Okay, what's the alternative? What would happen if you didn't do this? Do you need the money? What are all those questions that should have been asked? And I take a lot of responsibility because obviously listings don't come very easy. When they do come, I've I've actually turned away listings because I've told them I don't think it's right for you to sell. I'll give you an example. We helped a family sell their properties here. They bought a property in Bakersfield because that's where his job took him. He bought an amazing property in Bakersfield. Actually, I would consider it one of the top 100 properties in the Bakersfield area. And yes, there are such things in Bakersfield. Um, and they needed a house with a pool. They needed a house with, at least 3,000 square feet. They needed to have at least a half an acre parcel. They would like for it to be in a gated community, and we found it. Beautiful, beautiful home. When when there was talk that the market was going to, oh, when the pandemic hit and everybody thought that everything was going to go crazy, and I told them, Are you in distress? If I remember correctly, you bought this property free and clear. Your property has continued to see appreciation. I do not expect, based on what I'm reading, I do not expect, even with the interest rates to go up, for the home valuations to go down." And then I went through the whole process. And said, "I don't think it's a good idea for you to list, but if you decided to list and sell your home, I'd be happy to help you with that and make sure that you're doing this the right way." They haven't sold the property, and they're still happy there. Did I miss out on potentially a $50,000 commission? Absolutely. But guess what? And I'm not trying to say that I'm the saint of all saints when it comes to real estate, but when it comes down to Do I sleep at night? Yes. Do I feel that that I have the confidence that I stood with my clients and acted in their best interest? Um, yes. That's very important to me because I always go back to how my mom and dad were not represented correctly, and I believe that we owe that to our community. Anybody in the community. I think it's part of the ethics, a part
Yes,
of what we do.
I couldn't agree with you more. And I think I do think that's and it's tough because it's as a commission business, right? So we know sometimes commissions are hard to come by, right? Especially in times like the pandemic where it was tough to,
Yeah.
to close the deal.
And 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 there's the flip side too, is that when somebody wants to buy and you tell them all the reasons why something makes sense, the same process, asking what's the motivating factor is motivating you to buy a house. My most recent scenario was somebody called, responded to one of our postcards. I thought it was a prank at first, but this person was dead serious that they wanted to buy a home. So after asking some questions and verifying the information that was given, I was not comfortable in helping them find a house. Keep in mind that fair housing requires us to attend to anybody that comes our way that wants to buy or sell real estate, even if we don't like,
The motivation.
even if personally we don't like them, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But we have to fulfill that obligation. That it's an actually lawful requirement with fair housing. It's a law. Um, so I thought I was being pranked. I thought I was being tested. We went through the whole process. Then I asked him, you know, is are you losing your home through because are they asking for you to move out? It's like, oh no, as a matter of fact, I have a guaranteed for life rent at this amount. And I said, well, if I move you to the most affordable home, you're going to be paying this much money. Are you going to take a roommate? I'm not interested in a roommate. Okay, well, how do you plan on living? Oh, that's a good question. I didn't think about that. Yeah, maybe buying a house is not going to be in my best interest, right? But I didn't take it at face value, the pre-qualification that they had received. I requested for one of my trusted advisors to set up an appointment, um, somebody that was an expert in that type of loan that the gentleman was looking for. That person met with him. He called me right away. He's like, I really like this guy. It's going to be super tight. This guy has no business buying a house. And keep in mind, the buyer at that point was telling me, I want to cancel the appointment. I don't want to go with this guy because I already have an approval with somebody else. And it turns out that he thanked me for it.
Yeah.
And then there's other people that you think that it's good for them to buy, but you can't force them to because they're not emotionally ready for it. So anyhow, those are all the flips of it.
It,
So
no, it is, and I think that's more than our fiduciary responsibility. I think it's the ethical thing to do, right? And I get it, right? The business is tough because we're chasing commissions and we're chasing our paycheck, and sometimes we feel like we have to justify our paycheck. But I think at the end of the day, if you want to have longevity in this business, right, you have to do the right thing, which transitions and kind of gets me into the next question that I wanted to ask you, and it's one of the things that I love asking people, and I know you have experience in mentoring and kind of teaching the next generation of agents, recruiting, hiring, and training, and I know there's a lot of different facets of that. But in your opinion, like what separates the good agents and the bad agents, right? If you had somebody that you were mentoring and teaching who wanted to get in the business, what do you think are those qualities that separates a good agent from a bad agent, or a
okay,
great one?
well,
Let me just say, not even a good to a great.
there's two aspects of it. One of them is well, I think there's three. Starting with the first one is motivating factor. What motivates them to become a real estate agent? Why do they want to get into this business? Number two, um, personality types, and number three, financial support. So let's start with the motivating factor. I send out a postcard to everybody that passed the real estate exam. As a matter of fact, anybody that has signed up to take the exam, I send them a postcard. One, to invite them to interview me before they take the exam, and then the follow up is hey, congratulations, you passed the real estate exam. Now what? So I spent 30 minutes with them on the phone. Hey, what's motivating you to do this real estate? And some people will talk to me about, oh, the flexibility in the business, or I watch, how they do real estate on TV, and I'm like so passionate about it, blah blah blah. Um, and then out of I'm not kidding you, this is not an exaggeration. Maybe 1% of the people that I interview are the ones that are going to make it, right? Just on their perception and the motivating factor. I feel bad. One of the persons that called me recently, I asked them all the questions and the answers were just not. And there's the sense of responsibility because once again, as someone that was not, I picked the wrong mentor. I didn't pick the mentor that was the right one for me. So I actually took the Forrest Gump version of real estate, going the long route to be able to get to point, the second point in my career. Um, just it They didn't tell me how tough it was going to be. They didn't tell me how I was going to miss out on a lot of family activities. Keep in mind that I got my license when I was 18, back in 1990, end of 92, 1993. For the first time in my life, my parents went on a boating trip at Lake Casitas, and I wasn't there because I was showing houses on the weekend. I'm like, ah, our family friends had purchased a new boat, and my dad and mom got to go, and my brother did too, and I wasn't there. So that was hard. And then I started missing my high school life, and I should have been in college, to be honest with you. And for whatever reason, we won't discuss this here. I ended up not going to college like I wanted to, and I got into escrow because I really wanted to learn the whole process. So I have a better understanding, I think, that most people, because I've seen the toughness of spending hours cold calling people, following up on leads, hosting seminars, showing property, and then turning out that, oh, you know what, I would, we're not going to buy a house after all, or we bought a house with somebody else, right? So that's the emotional part. Some of them are not ready to deal with being told no.
Yeah.
I remember one night that we were cold calling on Thursday night, over Chinese chicken that was a Chinese um, uh, uh, chicken dinner that was brought to us. Back then, it was allowed, I think. We would do cold calling, and I would have to go through this cold calling routine. And I called one guy that owned a business here, and I said, "Hey, my name is so and so. I work with from your home." And I had to go through this routine, ask the next question after the next question. There was no common sense. And the guy said, um, I will move out feet first. And my follow-up question was, and when will that be? I didn't understand what he was saying that, the only time that he would move was when he died. And here I was not trained correctly and said, and when will that be? And the guy told me to, go somewhere, right? And hung
Yeah,
up on the phone.
exactly.
So, I was reviewing the phone calls with my then broker, and I said, "This is what happened." And he told me this, and I told him that, and he told me to go to HE double hockey sticks, right? And he was just laughing, laughing. He's like, "Well, did you understand what he said?" I was like, "No." I was like, he said feet first, and I was like, we're just like walking out. It's like, no, he means that he's not until he
Wants to
dies.
be
I
carried
was
out.
like,
Yeah. It's fun. Yeah, no, but see, I think that's so important, right? Like it's same when I got started in the business. I started in the mortgage business. I didn't have a mentor. Nobody teach you this. I got handed a list and put on a phone, and they said call them and ask them if they want to refinance or they want a loan. And I was like,
right.
nobody wants a loan, right? But there's then you ask. It's just nobody ever trains you.
Yeah,
So I
and
just I just think
it's a little bit of the common sense. Sorry to interrupt you there, but um, the if the guy would have told me, hey, or it was a husband and wife team, hey, it can be very rewarding. It's going to be a lot of hard work. There's going to be a lot of sacrifices, but if you stick to this, you're going to be able to live a very good lifestyle. The reason I chose them is because they used to go to my church and they used to have the nicest car. I mean, I was motivated.
yeah.
I think I had ambition back then, and they dressed nice, and they seemed to be so relaxed in comparison to my mom and dad, right? Mom and dad, my parents ended up having their own businesses. My dad, mowed lawns. He didn't just cut grass. They owned a business, right? Um, and my mom her business was to clean houses. They were very, very successful. Uh, and they were always stressed. And I remember spending a lot of summers mowing lawns with my dad and cleaning houses with my mom. So I figured my mom really wanted me to be a real estate agent. She wanted me to be a white collar employee. She wanted me to be successful in that sense. So I was, okay, I want to learn everything about real estate. I was not exposed to the right mentor. So that's why when I ask those questions, that's where I feel that sense of responsibility to be able to help the individuals not waste their time because, this business can be very unforgiving. Um, the consumers can be very mean to us because they've been conditioned to be mean to us because we're cold calling, we're following up on leads, etc. They don't understand how we get paid. They feel that we get paid to make every single phone call, and we don't. We're just following up on leads. And the average person, and I'm not faulting the consumer for this, I'm faulting the business and how we've actually trained our new agents to dial for dollars, no personality, not setting up, relationships, not setting up relationship selling versus, um, cold calling and
Yeah.
door
It's a lost
knocking.
art.
And
It's a lost
yeah,
art, right?
it
It
is.
was
So,
always be closing, and it was just trying to sell somebody something, and I just think that's nobody wants to be sold, right? I
yeah.
think
And
there's a
then
difference.
yeah, yeah. And I'm so sorry. The other consideration that I spoke very briefly about is the financial investment that you're making. I consider this to be a real estate, I mean, a business. And when you're starting a business, there has to be capital, right? I had to teach that to myself. I had to teach myself that when I started seeing my business or what I did as a business, then I realized, well, when other people open up a business, there's capital, right? When somebody opens up a restaurant, they have a group of investors. So now I include that. I've been including that in the last 20 years, that if you are going to get into the real estate business, you have to treat it as a business. You have to fund it like a business. And when I was the president of Century 21, um, anytime that I would interview a real estate agent or I say, are you treating this like a business? So that's the three aspects of as to what makes a successful real estate agent or not. So
Good. And that kind of follows through. And this is one of the things that that I mentioned at the beginning, some accolades. Um, and I think that experience and that mindset that you've approached this has earned you and I want to make sure I get this correctly, in 2024, the Ventura County Coastal Association of Realtors, the Broker of the Year,
oh yeah,
right?
huge
And
surprise.
and I know that's a huge accomplishment, right? It's a testament to hard work, mentoring. It's not just about sales, it's not about money. It's about all the other pieces that you talked about. So, share a little bit about, what that recognition meant to you personally, coming from the background that you did, the parents, working hard, and, just, share with us a little bit about that.
Thank you. Thank you for asking. Receiving a recognition like that is a double-edged sword. I'll be very honest with you. I had received the recognition as the manager of the year several years prior to that for the same association. And then I also had been acknowledged or recognized as the man of the year for the city of Oxnard somewhere around the same time. And sadly, some people let that go to their heads. I've had to be very cognizant of it. I had a very difficult time promoting myself as the 2024 uh, broker of the year for VCCAR because it is a recognition for that work that you talk about. So here's the formula for that. If anybody ever wants to be recognized on that level, one of them is obviously the leadership in the industry in as a either as a manager or as a broker, right? The most important one is how much time that you spend in promoting the realtor brand and how much you spend in supporting the members that are not part of your brokerage. So in Ventura County Coastal Association, we have roughly about 2,000 members. And for those of you that are not familiar how it's structured, um, we have geographical areas where associations are set up. Ventura County has two associations, which is the Conejo Association of Realtors and the Ventura County Coastal Association of Realtors. Those are the association of realtors that we have in our county. But those two have actually been mergers because almost every city back then, that's another thing that has changed. Back in the 90s, every city had their own little association of
Yeah.
realtors. And it was because of that book that I'm telling you about, because of very, very local, that, where the listings were. So So now our association, Ventura County Coastal, is comprised of almost every town from the Conejo grade west. So you have Camarillo, you have Fillmore, I think Piru is part of our area, Santa Paula, Ventura, Oxnard, and Port Hueneme. Ojai is not part of our association, so I stand correctly. We have corrected. We have three associations in Ventura County. So with that said, I've been involved in committee work for the association. I was on the board of directors. I became treasurer. I became secretary, or first vice president, and then president elect, and then president of the Association of Realtors. Neither of those had anything to do with being named broker manager of the year. They take into consideration what impacts we've actually done within the group that we're leading, and then also what kind of involvement we've had with our association. But I think most of the weight has to do with the involvement with the Association of Realtors. And obviously, hopefully, you're doing a good job and representing the brand well. So I think that's what it is. So how I felt, absolutely shocked, surprised. My wife came to the event, which is very unusual for her to go to any association events because she's in that category with you where she would much rather be doing something else than talking about business. Um, she feels that anyhow, I'm not going to talk about how she feels. That's the podcast for you, and you interview her how she feels about this stuff like that. But keep in mind that at that time, um, I was reaching a sunset in my career that I was kind of planning for, but it was actually sped up. And so I think this event was in January. By February 3rd, I was no longer affiliated as a broker, president of Century 21. And that's where if you don't have your headset right, you can actually go into this downward spiral thinking, oh, the rest of my association recognizes me as being the best of in the industry, but the individuals that took on that brokerage don't recognize me as being such. So that's where your head has to be set very well, and be modest and humble. Those two things are different. You have to be humble, and then you also have to be very grateful. One for the recognition, and then humble to not let it go to your head.
Yeah.
And then the other characteristic is feeling comfortable with other people congratulate you, because that congratulation is the most important congratulations that you're going to get in that minute in time, and then people are going to forget. So even though I use it on my business card as a way of as part of my trademark, I don't think that it's going to get me any more business. So
Yeah, and I think that's a great way to approach it, right?
Mhm.
It's an acknowledgement, it's a recognition of your hard work, and it's important to celebrate, those accomplishments because I think they're few and far between sometimes in the work we do.
Well,
But at the end of
since
the
you
day,
asked, let me go
yeah.
get it. Oh yeah. So 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 I have both of them here. This one is from 2013 when I was the
Man of the year.
manager of the year.
Okay.
Um, and then so that was in 2013. So 17, I don't know, almost 11 years later is this recognition, which was the broker of the year. Both of them were, like I said, very shocking, and yes, they do hold a very special place here in my office.
Yeah, and that's good again to celebrate that, but but not make that your identity, right?
Right.
It's there's a lot more stuff that you stand for, and again, you've done a lot, right? You've been in the business a while, and you've set a good example for people, and I'll end with this because I know we're pushing time, and I know everybody's busy, but you've accomplished great things. You've been broker manager of the year. You've been man of the year in the city of Oxnard. You've mentored. You've been president of Century 21. You've been on the board. I mean, I can go on and go on and go on. But my question, and this, I'll leave you with this: what's next?
Oh, what's next? Well, first of all, I think that the most important aspect in my life right now is I have, my wife and I have four kids. We have one in college, we have one in high school, and then we have one that is going from junior high into high school, and then we have a elementary that is going into junior high. All of them are very, very they're very blessed in sports, and their academics are amazing. So that's what my primary goal, our primary goal, is to make sure that they are successful. My daughter Violet just received. She's actually let's just say, without, modestly, she's a top three athlete in her age group for Ventura County in both volleyball and um, track and field. My other three kids, exactly the same. Oliver was a star hurdler in high school. But going back to businesses, my wife and I have made the decision that instead of me being in management and helping other people build their businesses, we're focusing on building our own business. So we became independent. We were going in that direction. Um, I decided to follow a couple of agents that had left Century 21 and joined EXP. I had already made the decision that that business model was actually the best business model, even for that brokerage that I was, for us to pursue that. Maybe a couple of the other cloud-based organizations that had surfaced. I did a lot of research on them. I found that if I were going to be back in real estate, that this was the best platform. This is not an advertisement. It's not a pitch, because it's not for everyone. But I do have to acknowledge that in order for me to be able to accomplish my goals, um, which was obviously raise my kids, spending more time with my kids, which I find it strange that I can get home at 3 o'clock, and still try to, feed my family, and we haven't necessarily skipped a beat as far as our income that we had before, but it is a struggle. So it is going out there, having the conversations, doing the networking that you were talking about, that you struggle with. I try to make it as fun as possible. I was honored at Coffee and Collab to be asked to facilitate the meeting while Mary Lee and Carolyn were traveling for their local association in Sacramento. That was a huge honor for me, because I thought it's been over a year since I've been actually leading anything, and for anybody to ask me, I was like, okay, so I might be on the right path. So so thank you for that opportunity, and that's actually how I ended up meeting you at those events, and I think it's been great. So to button it up, as what's next is just continue to grow in my growth, continue to be hopefully be a good example for my kids, and then to be a good mentor for for my wife, who is new in the real estate business. So those are the things that I can actually, and there's nothing wrong with making good money as long as it's honestly. So yeah.
And I agree, and I think, I think we're roughly the same age, and I think, as we've evolved in our career, we're not chasing that, association of the year awards, and that, it's I think you're chasing the same stuff that I am: father of the year award, husband of the year award, and being able to leave a legacy that our families can be proud of, right? And I think that's, again, something that's ingrained in us as Latinos. It's always, it's do what's right to our community, do it right for our family, and try to leave a legacy that I think others can be proud of, right?
Well, I appreciate you, and I think that you're on the right path as well. I in the few moments of conversations, I think that you and I have a lot in common, and maybe some of the same goals. You bring some resources to the table that I need to serve my clients better. I hope that, if you have some clients that I bring the resources that you need, so you can actually serve your clients better as well. And if I may, I'd like to just recommend that everybody approaches whatever they do with a sense of gratitude, because I've always spoken that gratitude is a muscle you have to practice. You have to exercise gratitude in order for you to be more successful. And I think that's one of the primary things that are in my mind. So
Yeah.
a prayer is an affirmation. I think that an affirmation is a prayer, and those are the things that we try to start every single morning with: an affirmation or a prayer, as to keep us, you know, cognizant of what we need to do on a daily basis and for what purpose, which is to serve our clients in a better way,
Yeah,
honestly.
no, I
So,
I completely agree. So Jorge, again, thank you for your time. We appreciate it. I think we could have sat here and talked for a couple hours, but again, just try to keep it centered on what we're trying to focus on. But I appreciate your time. Thank you for being a part of this. we'll put all your contact information and share with our crowd. And look forward to keep seeing you at the meetings every week.
Excellent. And anytime that I can, talk about a different subject matter on the topic of of real estate business, I'd be happy to continue that conversation.
Sounds good. Thank you, Jorge. We appreciate it.
Take care, guys.
Thank you.